So I had a friend years ago, this guy who wanted to start a church, and he had been really well trained at a mega church in America. If I said the pastor's name, most of you would know it. Well, I don't care. Rick Warren's church. So Rick Warren. So many of you heard Rick Warren, read The Purpose-Driven Life. He was trained at Rick Warren's church. So, I mean, you're talking about the top-notch training in America. He was very knowledgeable, very experienced, and a complete failure as a church planter. Despite all the money, all the training, all the experience, his church died so fast, it was a record how fast this thing went under. And he was so confused by it. He was so confused by it because it was a common pattern in his life that relationships ended. Matter of fact, his marriage ended shortly after the church ended. And he didn't have any real close friends. And he was like, what is going on in my life? He was so confused by this. It's like, especially in the church world, I mean, look at all the knowledge and experience. And what he didn't understand is that it happened because what holds relationships together is more than just what you know, right? You can be very knowledgeable and have bad relationships. And it's more than just being a really honest person. I mean, that's really good, but that's not enough. So what holds relationships together, as we've been saying for weeks, is trust. Trust is the glue of life. It's the most effective, it's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships together. So if you have trust in your relationships, then your relationships are going to be strong. And the more trust you can build, the stronger your relationships grow. And then anything's really possible in those relationships. But for some reason, people really didn't trust him. And not because of what he didn't know, or not because he wasn't honest, not because he wasn't knowledgeable, not because he wasn't competent, but because he was missing the third key component in trusting relationships. The third key component is connection. It's the ability to connect deeply with other human beings. Because some of you are like, let me define what this means. I'll show you how important it is. Connection really has this idea that you genuinely care about the other person. And then not only do you care in your heart, you're able to show it to them in a way that makes them feel cared for. You are focused on the other person. You show interest in the other person. Do you hear all the others in there? I mean, it is about the other person. So what I want you to understand is we tend to really trust people who care about us, and we tend not to trust people who don't care about us at all. So, I mean, think about it this way. Have you ever met someone who was very, very, very selfish, very self-centered? It was about them all the time. Ever met someone like that? So if you're sitting next to them, just nod. Don't do anything else, right? It's okay. Just let it go, right? Selfish people, self-centered people, did you trust them? We tend not to trust people who are very selfish and very self-centered. Right? But we tend to trust people who really demonstrate that they care about others. Let me give you an example of that from the business world. This guy's name is John Mackey. He was the CEO in the late 1980s, as you can see from his logo on his shirt, of a company called Whole Foods Market. One of the things he did was so interesting is he set a salary cap for all of the executives in his company. This is really unheard of in America, right? He set a salary cap so that no executive in his company could earn more than 8 times what the starting salary was of anybody in the company. So if you're a checkout person and you made $18,000 a year, let's go 20 because that's easier to do in my head. So $20,000 a year times 8, the CEO of the company couldn't earn more than $160,000. That's 8 times that. So you're like, well, he's struggling to get by. But are you kidding me? Do you know what CEOs make in America today? He voluntarily capped all the salaries. And then the company just exploded with growth. And despite the enormous growth of the company, he didn't change the policy. They made some minor adjustments as the years went on. But amid high growth, here's what he then did. He refused his stock option bonus. He reduced his salary to $1 a year. He donated all of his stocks to charity and set up a $100,000 emergency fund to be used by employees who were facing financial problems. $100,000 of his own money to help any employee that was in trouble. Now, would you want to work for a boss like that? Yeah, right? Who wouldn't? And the results in the company were staggering. Everyone trusted him from the top to the bottom because of how he demonstrated his care for others, right? And the company exploded. They went from 1 store to over 200 stores, became the world's largest organic retailer. And people trusted him because we tend to trust people who demonstrate that they care about us, and we tend not to trust people who don't care about anybody but themselves. So if you can't connect with other people deeply, then people aren't going to trust you. So for weeks now, we have been doing, this series grows more and more important in my mind as we've gone through it. So it's really sad that we're coming to the end of this thing because it's so significant in your life. We've been talking about the 3 things you need to develop in your life in order to really be someone that people can trust. We've started with the first letter, and that's A, B, and C. So able, are you able to get stuff done? And the first week I said, don't trust me to do surgery on you because I'm not able to do that. You're just going to die. Right? So don't trust me in that area of my life. But there are other areas of my life you can trust me because I'm competent. I'm capable. So you got to trust the right people, and you got to evaluate yourself. Am I really someone should trust in this area of their life? And then the second week, we talked about the one that most people associate with trust, which is believable. Can I believe what you're saying? And more than that, will you make sure that my secrets are safe with you and you won't gossip about me? And you protect, when someone shares something, you protect that. And so believable is really important. But all of those two alone are not enough. My friend was very honest and very competent and has no real friendships and no relationships because people can't trust him. Because what's missing is this last essential piece, the ability to be connected. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, I have been asking you to do 2 things during this series so far. I've been asking first to evaluate yourself, because I always want to turn this around on ourselves first. I want to be able to say, am I really doing a good job in these areas? Am I able? Is my competence growing? Am I believable? Am I really being honest? Am I really being honest in my relationships? And then also, am I demonstrating connection? Am I demonstrating that I care about the people around me so that they can trust me? But here's the other reason and why this series is so important. The other side of this is you need to evaluate your relationships that you're in. If I have no way to calculate how many times in 27 years of teaching, I have had people come up to me and tell me stories of terrible pain. Some of the deepest pain of their life because they trusted the wrong person. Have you ever done that? You ever trusted the wrong person? And it's like we needed criteria to know in our lives to evaluate, is this someone I should trust and is it not? And this is the criteria. You go through the A, B, and C, and if they have these, you can trust them. If they don't trust them. Trust is always earned. And if they don't have this, don't trust them, because you are going to be in pain if you do. So that's why this is such an important series and such an important message. So let's finish this series today by talking about what it does take to really build deep connection with other people so they can trust me. So welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Glad you tuned in today. In the description section below are the notes, so you can open up those notes. And if you haven't done this already, would you grab the notes out of your program, grab a pen. There would be some things you're going to want to write down. Let's get started. 3 things to really build deep connections with people. First, I must learn to listen well. I must learn to listen well. This is where I should really be handing it over to someone else. Not my greatest strength. Listening well. All of us have the experience, especially in the world today, like listening is becoming a lost skill in our society. Ever tried to have a conversation with someone who wouldn't put their phone down? Right? Isn't that exhausting and frustrating? It's like, I remember one time I remember trying to have a serious conversation with someone and they would not put their phone down. I just quit. And what happens in that moment is, the message they're sending is, you are so unimportant to me that I'm not even going to listen to you. And so that connection is broken and trust is damaged. That connection gets broken right there and trust is damaged. And so it's, a matter of fact, one of the interesting things I read was this counselor, a counselor said, in my 14 years as a therapist, no one has ever entered my office claiming to be a bad listener. Now think about who's going in there. Their marriages are on the rocks, their family's falling apart, and are you a bad listener? No. I'm above average. Really? I wonder if that's true. Now, again, this is not my greatest strength, okay? You ever see the old Disney movie, The Absent-Minded Professor? So I can't make my car fly like he did in the movie, but there is always something going on in my head. Always, always, always. So sometimes I realize, oh, there's people in the room, and I didn't know that. And sometimes, oh, you're talking to me. Oh, I didn't know that, because there's so much going on up here. It's like, do-do-do. So I'm not very good at this, so this is what I've learned. Okay, so take this for what it's worth, because I need this really bad. Sometimes I have to be snapped back into reality. It's like, hey, pay attention. Oh, yeah, okay. So here we go. The first thing is you learn to pay attention. Great listeners pay attention, and they pay attention really well. If you read your Bible, one of the things that you're going to hear that God says repeatedly is how frustrated he is when that people don't pay attention to him. I wonder how frustrated. Let me show you this. In the Old Testament, in the book of Psalms, there was a verse where God was talking about this. He said, my people wouldn't listen to me. So he's talking here specifically about the nation of Israel. He would send prophets to warn them. He gave them, the Old Testament, the verses. He constantly was trying to get their attention, and his frustration was they wouldn't listen to me. In the New Testament, Jesus comes along, and if you read the New Testament, you hear Jesus say over and over again, if you have ears to hear, would you please listen to me? And it's not that there was an earless society. They all had ears. They just weren't using them. So he was begging people repeatedly, would you listen to what I'm saying? Listen to me. And when I read that verse this week, I wondered, would God say that about me today? Would he say it about you? Would he say, I love Brian so much, but he just doesn't listen very often? Would he say it about you? Because so much of the first series that we did in the start of the year was all about learning to listen for the voice of God and respond to his promptings, and I wonder how good a job we do at that. Because it matters to him. He wants to guide us and direct us in this world. And it's one of his biggest frustrations that we don't pay attention to what he's trying to get us to hear. One of the challenges of this is there's a big distinction. Have you learned this? There's a lot of difference between listening and hearing. Have you ever thought about that before? I had never thought about that until prepping this message. Never. So this is how bad I am at this. And for most of my life, my goal was just to get better at hearing. And I got good hearing so that I could be doing something and you could be talking to me, and then you're like, and my kids would say, Dad, you're not even listening. And I could parrot back what they were saying because I was hearing them. And every time I do that, there was never one time where they felt better because it didn't mean I was actually listening. I was hearing, but I wasn't listening. Do you know the difference? Do you understand that? There's a difference. For so many years, I made it my goal to be better at hearing. Wrong goal. We got to get better at listening. And so obviously this means some things. No distractions, no cell phones, good eye contact, don't interrupt, shut down your mind, which is so hard for me to do. But that's what it's really about. A good listener. Here, matter of fact, I read something prepping this message that inspired me. Sometimes I read something, I'm like, I want to be like that person. This was one of those stories. There's a woman who said the best listener she ever encountered in life, she encountered in college. She was a newspaper reporter. This other guy, Nate, was a newspaper reporter. And so she started to get to do some interviews with him. And she said this. When an interviewee was talking, Nate gave the person his undivided attention like there was nobody else and nothing else around. People really open up when you treat them like they are the most interesting person in the world. I read that and I thought, what if I did that? What if one of my kids came to me, nothing else mattered other than what they were about to say to me? Now, what would happen in a marriage if that's how you treated your spouse? Like everything about to come out of their mouth is the most interesting thing you've ever heard. Right? So we got a little ways to go on this, don't we? This is a challenge. So how many of you now think you're good listeners? Well, we're not even done. So let's get into the next point. The second thing is, you listen to understand, not reply. I remember the first time I read those words in a book, I groaned. It's like, wait a second. The goal isn't for them to hear what I got to say, because I got a lot to say. And it's not. The goal is to listen for the purpose of trying to understand what they have to say, not reply, which is, again, shutting down your mind and just really trying to listen to what they're saying. Oh, this is a challenge. So let me put the problem, let me tell you where the problem really lies on this one, okay? The real problem with this is with you. All of you. You're the problem. Because we listen at 300 words a minute and you only talk at 100. So talk faster, because I can keep up. And if you talked faster, this wouldn't be such a problem for my brain, which is sitting and idle waiting for you to finish talking. So it's like, see, the problem's with you. No, the problem's not with you. It's harder, though. I actually knew a guy that maybe made it up to 25 words a minute. Oh, my goodness. It was so hard. It's like, I don't know what to do. This is a challenge. We think a lot faster than people speak, and listening is more than just waiting for the other person to stop talking. We all long to be heard. We all want to be heard. There may be few words as painful in our society today as, you don't get it. You don't get it. Dad, you don't get it. You don't understand what I'm trying to say, Dad. Or, honey, you don't get it. You don't understand. Or to your friend, you don't understand. You don't get it. Those are such painful words to say. And if anyone said those to you recently, they should wave a giant red flag. Those words are bad words to hear. That's just not okay. That means we're going down the wrong path and we need to make some kind of change. As a matter of fact, have you ever, especially important when somebody's hurting. This is amplified times 10 when somebody's in pain around you and they're trying to talk to you. This is really important. Have you ever read the book of the Bible called Job? There's a book in the Old Testament called Job. Job was you can't imagine more pain than this guy. He lost his business, he lost his wealth, and then every single one of his children were killed. Every single one of them. He was in absolute agony, and Job's friends came to talk to him. And what they did, if you've ever read the book of Job, was horrible. They kept blaming him. It's your fault. You must have done something to make God mad. That's why he's doing all this, because God doesn't do this to people. And so at one point, Job finally was just this honest with him. He said, if you want to offer comfort, would you just listen to me? This is what makes us feel better, is when we know we've been heard. When someone has finally stopped talking and started listening to try and understand what we're going through. Not listening so I can give you better advice or fix all your problems, but just listen to understand. So the key on your notes is this. You reflect back what you've heard. This is how you know you're really listening well. Is when you say, so what I heard you saying is, and you say it and they go, yeah, that's how I feel, or that's what I was saying. That's what I'm trying to say to you. And when they go, yeah, you know you're listening well. So if you want to really test it, this is how you test it. So what I hear you saying is this. So again, how good a listener are you? Do you listen for the purpose of trying to understand them? Or do you listen so that you can get to the fixing part of it? That's disaster. Because the third one that's just so important is this. Once you've listened and you're paying attention to them, you're listening with the goal of understanding, and once you understand, now you empathize with them. Okay, so I understand what you're saying now. Now, this is where the real power in relationships happens, is when you start to empathize with the people in the middle of the pain that they're experiencing. It's interesting right now, there are a lot of different conversations about superfoods. Have you heard this phrase at all? There are all these superfoods. Superfoods are superfoods because when you eat them, they do amazing things in your body. Blueberries and kale and things like that. It's like, yeah, superfoods. Hershey's chocolate is in the superfood group. It's super. So for me. This empathy is a superfood for relationships. If there was one thing you were going to focus on in 2019 that was going to make all your relationships better, this is it. If you focused on this, you would change your relationship with your spouse, you would change your relationship with your friends, change your relationship with your kids. It is that powerful. So there's two parts to it, and this is why it's challenging. Very few people do this well. First part of empathy is where you imagine what they're thinking and feeling and what drives their behavior. So it's the old adage, you try and put yourself in their shoes. You try and figure out, okay, so they're telling me this. I heard what they're saying. Why are they feeling that way? And you're trying to put yourself in their shoes. Oh, I guess, if I'd have been raised in a home like that and this would have happened to me, I probably would feel that way too. Okay, so it's intellectual. It's here. You're trying to understand it. And most people stop with empathy right there. That's not where you stop with empathy. You go on with empathy to the second part of it where you allow yourself to feel something of what they feel. That's where the superpower happens. Jesus was a master at this. So Jesus one time was walking along, comes into this community, and there's this funeral procession. This woman who's a widow, her husband's already dead, is now burying her son too. Jesus, in that moment, feels tremendous compassion for him. That's the feeling, because in that moment, he can imagine in that society what it's like to be a widow. You've already buried your husband, now you're burying your only son. I mean, her future is so terrifying. He doesn't just think what it's like to be in her shoes, he feels what it's like to be in her shoes. And because of that, he reaches out with compassion and brings her son back to life. This is how Jesus lived. This is how Jesus lived. He didn't just live with his head, he lived with his heart. He lived with his heart. Empathy is not empathy until you feel a little bit of what they're feeling. That's where you got to go. And when people do it right, it is powerful. When people do it wrong, it hurts you badly. I remember one time, I got this terrible piece of news. I was in so much pain, and I risked sharing my pain with a friend. Some of you had this experience. I shared it with a friend, and my friend, saw me in pain. And what do we do when we see someone we love in pain? We want to make them feel better. We're going to make you feel better. And so my friend said, well, this isn't actually bad news. It's actually good news. And they tried to just make me feel better. Do you know how much better I felt? 0% better. I felt worse. You rarely talk someone out of feeling bad. It's not even what they need from you. They need you to try and intellectually imagine what it's like to be in their shoes and to feel some of what they're feeling. And when you do that, then you make them feel better. On the back of your notes are all these different comments that you could say in those situations. It's like, It's validating what they're feeling. And we don't have time to go through any of those, but I didn't want to bring this up without showing you examples, because sometimes you just don't know what to say. Memorize some of those and make them your go-to, because they're empathy statements. But let me show you again how important this is in the Bible. Look at this. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Look at this. We are supposed to be so deeply connected to each other that when you're in pain, I come into your life when you're crying, and I tell you 10 reasons why God will make it all better in your future. That's what we do as Christians. Well, have you read this verse in the Bible? Have you read this verse in the Bible? Quote some Bible verses to you, and we'll make you all feel better, right? No. What are we supposed to do when we see someone in pain and they're crying? What do? We let our heart hurt like their heart hurts, and we weep with them. That's empathy. And when they're rejoicing, we celebrate with them. We let our heart feel a little bit of the joy they're feeling. That's empathy. That's what God says we're supposed to do in our relationships. Many of you know that I've taught for years on this little formula that is so important in relationships. You listen with the goal of trying to understand, and then you validate their emotions. But empathy is way beyond validating and saying, hey, that emotion, I get why you feel that. Empathy is way beyond validating. It's saying, I feel a little of what you feel. I'm so sorry. So when people get this in relationships, it transforms them. So let me ask you a question. How good a listener are you? How good are you at listening? Do you really give people your undivided attention when they're talking to you? Do you listen with the goal of trying to understand what they're saying? Is empathy a part of what you're saying, especially when you see someone hurting? You're really trying to enter into their pain, even if their pain makes no sense to you, even if their pain seems stupid, even if you think, I would never feel that way in a billion years. You set all of that aside and make it about them. How good a listener are you really? Because this is what it takes to actually connect with someone. And you won't build trust unless you can connect, but that's not all. The second thing you got to do is you got to build others up. You want to really build connections with people and make it safe for people to trust you, then you have to be a builder. Because isn't it true in this world there are a lot of people who tear down? How many people have you worked with in your life who were so destructive in your life? They constantly tore you down, put you down, made fun of you. if you follow Jesus, that can never be part of our lives. Look at the standard where he puts the bar for us. He says, I want you to encourage one another and build one another up just as you are doing. So look at this. If you have your pen, would you underline those words first? Build one another up. So what is God's expectation for those who say that you are a Christian, a follower of Jesus, you attend a church? Your number one thing, he says, I want you to learn how to build one another up. So it's like, okay, how do I do that? Well, he says right there in the verse, encourage one another. If you will get good at encouraging the people around you, you will build them up and you'll make them better. Now, this is just a habit. Some of you are not in the habit of being very encouraging, but it's just a habit. You can get in the habit of it. So let me show you 4 things I've learned about. First, to show you how important this is. There was a company that wanted to research why some of their teams are so effective and some of their teams are terrible, constantly in conflict. So they brought in this outside research group. It was a large company, and they spent a lot of time researching, and then they discovered this. They said this, the number one factor that made the greatest difference between the most effective teams and the least successful teams was the ratio of positive comments to negative comments. The greatest teams in their organization gave positive feedback, 5.6 positive comments to every 1 negative. The average teams gave almost 2 positive things for every 1 negative. The below average, the failing teams, every 3 negative things, they said 1 positive. We just don't function this way. This isn't how teams are built. It's not how families are built. It's not how relationships are built. We build each other up with positive comments of encouragement. So let's talk about 4 things you can do to do this. So first, letter A, schedule time to catch people doing right. It's so easy to catch people doing wrong because their wrong annoys us. So we have to be intentional about scheduling time to catch people doing right around us because people are doing right around us all the time and we just don't even notice it. You know, I first learned about this years and years ago, that you can build people up by doing this. And so I put in my daily planner every week, I put a pop-up reminder for years that said encouragement. And my goal was when that pop-up reminder came in my calendar, I was supposed to encourage people. But I lived such a crazy life, you know, working so many hours, I can't tell you how many times over the years I just dismissed that. I ain't got no time for that. And I would dismiss it. And then I forgot about the habit until last November. The department I work in, they sent out an email and said, you know, it's Thanksgiving time. Why don't we take some time and write some of our coworkers a note saying what we're thankful for? Well, very few people, of course, did that. But it triggered something in me when I read it. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is who I'm supposed to be. I'm a follower of Jesus. I build others up by encouraging them. So I put that reminder in my calendar going forward now. It just says encouragement. And I started last Thanksgiving. From Thanksgiving to Christmas, I wrote 20 different encouragement notes, either cards or emails, and sent them out. And then I've just continued it. This last week, I did 3 more, and now it's just a habit in my life. I'm looking for people around me who are doing what's right. Because where I work, there are always people looking for what you're doing that's wrong. Right? You ever work in a place like that? I mean, that's just how it is. There are some people that are really, really, really critical. And so I want to try and bring something positive into that environment. So I had this friend that was leaving the company, that got a different job offer, and they were going to be going. And when I first went to work there, I was so grateful for this person. And so I immediately felt prompted by God, write that person. And so part of what I wrote is, I said, here are some of my favorite qualities that I've inside of you from the time when I've gotten to work with you. You're very thoughtful, very knowledgeable of all your accounts. You have a commitment to doing things so well. You have a strong work ethic. You're kind. And I said, your listening skills are fantastic. You are a great listener. And I just reflected back to this person some of the things I'd seen in my time of working with them. They wrote me back a little bit later and said, thank you. This is so thoughtful, and you choose your words with such care. And that is really important. Because if you're going to do this right, you have to do it this way. You have to really prepare for it. When I'm writing an encouragement note to someone, I open an email, start typing, let my first impressions come out. What do I really like about this person? What do I admire? And I start writing it, and then I leave it open, and sometimes I'll leave it open for days. And I'll just keep adding to it. You don't just wing this. You're not going to wing a positive encouragement note. Give it some time. Really let it, what do you like about them, which is the third one. Be specific. What do you admire? What do you appreciate? How have they helped you or others? What are their strengths? You know how few people actually are aware of what their strengths are? This amazes me. Most of the people that you're going to see this next week have no idea what they're good at, but they could give you a long list of everything they're not good at. We're to be builders of people. We build people up, and we build them up by encouraging them. So one of my friends, right around the holidays, I wrote him a big, this email took me days to write. One of the things I said in there is, you have such a calm demeanor. There have been times when the issues we've been discussing in the room are loaded with emotion, and I so admire how calm you remain as you dig to the root cause and attempt to identify the real problem. It's one of your strongest skills, and I admire it. So the whole email was filled with things like that, and the response back from the person was just overwhelming because we don't get this. If you follow Jesus, we're supposed to give this. We build people up. We don't tear them down. And we build them up through encouragement. And then all of it, of course, has to be sincere. You have to actually mean every word you're writing, every word you're saying. You can do this verbally. But let me show you just what's possible. There was a woman who was teaching a summer school. She was a teacher, and she had to teach summer school one summer, and most of the kids that were in there were in summer school because they needed some help. And so she primarily had seniors, kids who were about to be seniors for the next year. And one of her students that summer was a kid named Michael. He was a C- student and happy to be that way. He was getting by, and that was good enough. But he was capable of so much more, but he was just kind of lazy, but really likable. And so one day she assigned all the students an assignment, and they had to do this writing assignment, and then they had to stand up in front of the whole class and read their writing assignment. And so he stood up, and when he read what he had written, the teacher literally said, I was stunned by his unprecedented level of wisdom. How often do you say 17-year-old boys are wise? Right? Not a common phrase. But she was so struck by what he wrote that on his evaluation, she said, this gave me goosebumps. And then she handed out the papers, and she was teaching the class, and 10 minutes later, Michael put his hand up and said, did you really like my writing in the class? And she said, absolutely. Do you want me to call your mom and tell her about it? And he said, you mean it? And she said, yeah. And so at the break, she said, I phoned his mom that afternoon. I described his writing. I said, with those skills, Michael is really going places. You must treasure him. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by the unmistakable sound of a mom crying. 6 years later, I ran into Michael in a university computer lab. His eyes lit up when he saw me. He came over to me and told me that his mom would be attending his graduation that spring from an educational psychology master's program. And he thanked me for inspiring him. And she said, I marveled at how 5 simple words on a summer day changed the whole course of this young man's life. That's the power you have. You have the power to change someone's life forever with your words of encouragement. Did you know that? Did you know you have that much power? 5 words. So the question, of course, is how good are you at building up the people around you? When was the last time your spouse heard from you what you like about them? What you admire about them? What you really appreciate about them? When was the last time your kids heard that from you? Or your friends? Do you have any good friends in your life? People that you're like, oh my goodness, I love this friend. My life would be so much worse if they weren't a friend in my life. Have you told them? Do they know it? And then second, if you're looking for someone to trust, do they have this quality in their life? Are they someone who builds people up, or are they someone who tears someone down? Okay, one more thing. You want to really connect with people, you have to learn this one. Oh my goodness, I'd rather talk about practically anything else in the world than this one. Do you know I've never ever preached on this subject in my entire life? almost 28 years of preaching, I have never talked about the subject of vulnerability ever. Well, there's a reason for that. People who really connect deeply have the ability to be appropriately vulnerable, right time, right place, not oversharing, but appropriately vulnerable. So let's talk about what vulnerability really means. Vulnerability is the state of being our authentic selves with another person, sharing the most important parts of who you are, and that means risking rejection, being seen for who and what you are. And it's so important. One author said, vulnerability is the key to connection because it's the courage to open up to another human. It's letting them know. As a matter of fact, you can't really connect with another human being from behind walls. Can't. You can be in relationship with them. You can have some kind of friendship, some kind of marriage, but you cannot really be close. You cannot be glued together in a true, trusting relationships without vulnerability. You have to risk vulnerability. It's the only way to make the relationship as strong as it's possible, as it's capable of being. But the problem with this, of course, is that previous one said risking rejection. The reality is you can be vulnerable with the wrong person and then you get hurt, right? Never done that? You risked with somebody and oh my goodness, they use that against you. So what happens in those moments is that, I have this wounded part of me and I'm going to risk it. I'm going to tell you this and then you treat me this way. You talk about it, you share it with others, and I'm so deeply wounded that my natural response is I put a wall around my heart and nobody is ever going to hurt me like that again. Now, many of you know, if you've suffered through trauma as a child, one of the most natural reactions to childhood trauma is you build a wall around your heart and nobody's getting close again. And again, if it's just what you have to do to survive, and you may not even be aware that you're doing it. Many people live with giant walls around their hearts, and they're not even aware that that's how they're living. I wasn't. I had no idea. If you'd have told me 3 years ago that I have giant walls around my heart, I'd have said, what are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about, because I didn't know. I knew there were all kinds of signs that things were wrong, but I didn't know that it meant that this is how I was living. You cannot have trusting relationships from a distance. One author said, by shutting down the risks of being vulnerable, we also shut down the possibilities of joy, intimacy, closeness, and connection. So do you want any of that last list? Do you want to be really, really joyful? Do you want to be really close with another human being? Do you want to really be connected? Then you have to do the first part. You have to risk vulnerability, and it is a risk because they could reject you. So some of you are sitting there going, okay, like Brian, I get this one. I may not be all that good at. What's the solution? Well, here's the solution. I'm going to ask all of you to turn around and share your darkest secret with the person next to you. So go ahead and get started. I'll just wait. Just take a moment, do that right now. Share it, let it out. Yeah, we're not doing that. My goodness. No, that's not what's vulnerable. You ever met someone like that? First time you meet them, they're like sharing everything. It's like, oversharing. Stop. That's not what we're doing, okay? Please don't do that. Instead, the most important thing, I just want you to understand how important this is. If you have really been hurt a lot in life, I don't expect you to walk out of here and start really, really being vulnerable. That's going to take time. But I want you to know how important it really is. I don't want you to walk out of here without understanding that you cannot have great relationships, trusting relationships without this. So that's all I really want you to understand today. Matter of fact, are you satisfied with your relationship with God today? Do you wish your relationship with God was closer, more powerful? Can't have it without this. Cannot have a great relationship with God if you're not going to be vulnerable with Him. Cannot have it. Paul wrote about it. In 2 Corinthians, he said, but God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Paul had to learn that. Therefore, he said, I'll boast all the more gladly my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest on me. And so he had weaknesses. He kept begging God, take this away. And God said, no, you don't get it. It's only in the point of honesty with me about what you're weak at that you get me, that you get my power. Because if you were doing perfectly in every area, you don't need me. So the only way to have a transformational relationship with God is vulnerability with God and say, God, I'm totally blowing it in this area. God, I can't do this. I try and fall. I can't do this. And God shows up then and says, good, now you get me. So you don't get him and the real power of God in your life till you're vulnerable with God. That's why some of you, your prayers, you don't even pray because it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't do anything. It's because you pray safe little prayers. And you won't experience God there till you pray honest prayers, vulnerable prayers. That's where you'll experience God. Stop telling him what you think he wants you to hear and tell him what you actually think and what you actually feel. Be that vulnerable with God and you'll experience God. And that's not just what our God relationship needs, that's what every marriage in America needs. Every marriage in America needs to have the ability to be that vulnerable with their spouse. Every parenting relationship, to be a strong parenting relationship, needs vulnerability, appropriate vulnerability with their children, with their parents. Every great friendship that you want to build requires vulnerability. They all require it. You can't get there without it. Matter of fact, I remember one time I was in a room, a bunch of us, and we didn't really know each other very well, and this one question got tossed out, and somebody went first, and they could have played it safe, they could have given a safe answer, and they gave an answer that was very vulnerable. They revealed some of the mistakes they'd made, and it was appropriate in the room. And it was like everyone's looking around like, can you say that in here? I was like, what? And the result was immediate in the room. It's like the tension level in the room went down, and then the next person shared, and then the next person shared. And it was like all of a sudden, we all started taking some bricks out of the wall. And the closeness that develops in those times is amazing. Vulnerability is the key to the great relationships that you want. It's also the key to trust. So you got to understand how important this is. And then second, you got to take a risk with the right person. I cannot emphasize that enough. You should not, trust is earned, right? You understand that? People are like, well, you should just trust me. Never listen to somebody who says you should just trust them. Ever. Don't you ever just trust somebody. Never. Trust is always earned. It's always earned. And if you violate that, you are in for so much pain. You don't just trust people. Trust is earned. And if you trust the wrong person, man, you're headed for so much pain. That's part of why I was so excited about doing this series. I'm tired of people saying, I trusted this person, they really stabbed me in the back. I trusted this person, they betrayed me. I trusted this person, they hurt me. It's like we just think, as Christians especially, we're so naive about this. Like, oh, they're a Christian, I gotta trust them. No, you don't. They're a human. So they may be trustworthy and they may not be. Plenty of Christians should never be trusted. Plenty of Christians should never be trusted. You don't just trust them. I don't care if they know Jesus, follow him. I don't care what their spiritual life is like. You don't just trust them. You evaluate their life based on these three criteria. Are they able? Are they believable? And do they connect deeply? If they don't, you don't trust them. And then the third thing is you got to risk letting them see the real you. Because this is where, you take a little step. You say, here's what I want you to know. Here's what I'm actually afraid of. Here's where I struggle. Here's what I'm not good at. Here are my weaknesses. Matter of fact, do you want to know where Jesus wants the relationships in the church to go? This will freak some of you out. And don't do it, by the way. Don't do it. Not now. It said, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. So there's B there, but it's invisible. So you may be healed. So in the healing, there's emotional healing, by the way. So he says, this is where I want your relationships to go. You are so vulnerable with each other, so open. You live such open lives that you have people you can trust, that you can say, hey, I really blew it last night. Here's what I did. Can you pray for me? Do you have people like that in your life? I remember, you want to see how powerful this really is. Years and years and years ago, I was doing a series on sexual purity, and I decided for the first time in my life to teach on porn. The statistics about porn addiction are just overwhelming. The consequences are serious, but people don't talk about that because we just think of it as an innocent thing. It's not innocent. It has consequences. And I had gotten stuck years and years ago. And I fought it, and I put all these safety things in place, and I developed accountability, and I had gotten out of it, but I'd never talked about it. And so one Sunday I stood up in front of the whole church and I taught on this secret part of my life that I'd never talked about. It was the quietest a crowd has ever been, ever. Because I know people are looking around like, can you say this? Can you say this in a church? Are we going to fire him now? What's going to happen? Is he going to lop his head off? What's going to happen? And nothing happened. And the incredible thing was what happened afterwards. I felt like a Catholic priest. No disrespect to a Catholic priest, but I heard so many confessions that next week. You can't imagine how many confessions I heard, because when people saw that I was able to be vulnerable and take a risk, then all of a sudden it made it safe for all of them to be vulnerable, and they started taking risks. And the amount of healing that came out of that single message was amazing, because that's the power of vulnerability. So, let's finish this part with this. The first thing I want you to ask is, can people trust you? Can they trust you because you are a good listener? Does your spouse feel listened to by you? Do your kids feel like you listen to them? Start with you. And then how good are you building others up? If we were tracking the ratio of positive to negative comments in your marriage, what would we see? Which way is it going? Again, how about with your friends? How about at work? Do you really build others up through encouragement? And how vulnerable are you? Not oversharing, but appropriate. And again, some of you know this is a huge weakness for you. Some of you, the next step for you in your life is to go see a counselor and to be vulnerable with someone like that. It doesn't matter who you're first vulnerable with. Pick a good counselor and start there. It will help you develop this in your life. You will find enormous healing with the right counselor. But then the other thing I said is, don't just say, hey, am I a trustworthy person? I want you to evaluate your relationships. As a matter of fact, here's what I really want you to do. Sometime this week, I want you to sit down and think about the worst relationships you've had in your life, the people that have hurt you the most. Not hard to think about, is it? They pop right into your mind. And then I want you to ask, of these three things, able, believable, and connected, what was missing? What did you miss? Because you got into the relationship with them. You let them be your best friend. You let them be your boyfriend or girlfriend. You let them, you trusted them with some huge part of who you were, and they hurt you so bad. And you need to evaluate it so you don't repeat it. Oh, I didn't understand how important connection was. Or I trusted someone who wasn't believable. And I got hurt for it. Don't repeat it. Learn from it. Learn how to evaluate your relationships based on these three things. If you're just here today or watching today and you are exploring your faith with us, Jesus is an amazing model of connection. As a matter of fact, next time we're together, I can't wait to show you how Jesus Christ models all of these things, because some of you really struggle to trust Jesus. And I want to show you how Jesus was not only able and not only believable, but he was deeply connected to you. I mean, the proof of how much he cares about others is what he did. If he was caring about himself, he'd have stayed in heaven. He did not need to come. He came because you and I matter so much. One of our worship songs says, he didn't want heaven without us. Because we matter that much to him. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. So because he cared and he didn't want heaven without us, he came. And at the end of his life, he gave his life on a cross for all of us to pay for what we've done that's wrong, because he loves us so, so much. And Jesus has already paid in full for everything we've done that's wrong. And if you will let him, he will forgive you and connect deeply with you, as deep as you'll allow it. And if some of you want a real relationship with God, this is what you say to him. Say, Jesus, with the faith I have, I'm turning to you today. I want a real relationship with you. Not rules, not religion. I want to really get to know you. So please forgive me and come and make your home inside of me today. I want to learn how to trust you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up, can you all take your connections card out of your program and just take a moment and fill this out. Even if you're a regular attender, we ask you to do this every week. Just take a moment and fill it out. If you prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you, would you check that box? Let us know what you've done. Now, next week, I will not be here teaching. Would love to have you come back, though, and see what Andy Stanley has to say. And then the following week, we will go and I will show you how all this relates to God. So thanks so much for coming. Drop this in one of the offering boxes back by the doors where you came in. Hope to see you again next week.